Chapter 1461. The moment Krystal met Mason's cold eyes, she knew that his paternal love for her was gone. She should have seen this coming, but her heart sank to the pit of her stomach. After all, she was showered with love for so many years. "Dad, please mind your words. I'm no longer your father." Mason was being patient with her. He already did her a favor by not skinning her alive after what she had done to Molly. When Tatiana wanted to say something, Krystal knelt before Sherman. No one saw that coming, but Olivia knew what Krystal was plotting right away. The foolish Krystal was finally using her brain for once. Initially, Olivia guessed Krystal's family could be hiding deep in the mountains or had escaped Aldenvine secretly. However, the latter would have been difficult because the first thing the Heaths did was seal all routes. Even if Krystal's family managed to escape out of luck, they wouldn't be able to return to Aldenvine. How could they bring themselves to move away from their country where they had lived for generations? Hence, it was highly possible that they were hiding in the mountains. Olivia knew Krystal's character very well. Could Krystal endure such a poor lifestyle after enjoying luxury for many years? No, someone could track her down easily as soon as she made expenses in the city. Yale had been gearing up for this. Who knew that Krystal would take advantage of her baby for her sake? That was the Kingstons' descendant. She chose to show up at the party because she had foreseen that Mason would never reveal such embarrassing news to the public. It was a gamble. Krystal was gambling that the Kingstons would protect her. "Grandpa, even though I'm no longer one of the Heaths, I'm still your granddaughter-in-law. And I'm pregnant with Yale's baby. Please take me with you. I have nowhere to go." Krystal had learned the essence of Tatiana's teaching. Women shouldn't be too pushy. Acting weak was their best weapon. Thinking about the sickly Molly, Krystal thought of using a similar tactic. She had a bargain that Sherman could never refuse: the baby. Things had been awkward between the Heath family and the Kingston family. At first, the Kingstons intended to marry Yale to the Heath family, who opposed the idea. Following that was the story of the babies getting switched at birth. That should have made it more convenient to make a marriage happen since the Kingstons had raised Molly, but unfortunately, they didn't treat her nicely. Now that Yale had left his family, it was more difficult for the marriage to happen. As the illegitimate child, Yale was more of a chess piece. On the other hand, his spoiled younger brother grew up to have a delinquent character. He was involved in almost everything illicit. Not to mention the time he got too close to his aunt. Although he barely survived the beating, he couldn't get it up again. Thus, the Kingstons placed all their hope on Yale. The question of whether he could get together with Molly was not the main issue. The main issue was that she might not be able to get pregnant due to her weak body. To their dismay, Yale was head over heels for her. That was why Krystal's baby was important to the Kingstons. While Krystal was away, Adalia and even Sherman often paid a visit to make sure Krystal would give birth to the child. Krystal knew what was going on within the Kingston household, hence her daring bet. As she had expected, Sherman's expression changed slightly. He had never liked Krystal in the past, but her family background made up for it. Now that she was a nobody, his disgust toward her went through the roof. If it weren't for the baby, he wouldn't have spared her a glance at all. No matter how reluctant he was, he said, "You're pregnant. Get up before you speak." Chapter 1462. Yale gritted his teeth the second Krystal showed up. He was exasperated. The way she treated Molly was still vivid in his head. Mason and Tatiana exchanged glances. They didn't want people to learn of such an embarrassing history for the sake of their reputation. In case it became a topic for water cooler conversation, they kept quiet. Olivia snorted lightly. "She's finally clever for once." Ethan stroked her head, saying, "It's just a matter of time before this happens. It won't make much of a difference." "You're right." Olivia stood still and merely watched. She had no pity for Krystal after what Krystal had done. Not even Krystal's death could atone for her sins. Since Krystal had played her card, it all depended on how Sherman reacted. A tear-stricken Krystal moved to him while kneeling. "Grandpa, if you don't want me either, I'll have nowhere else to go. Please take pity on me. Take pity on your grandson. He's 3 months old. Her plea was no different from putting Sherman on the chopping board. He didn't want to offend Mason. But what other choice did Sherman have? Krystal was pregnant with his grandchild. Krystal played her part shamelessly. She knew that someone as prideful as Sherman wouldn't be able to do anything to her in the watchful eyes of the public. The Kingstons were in a tough spot. A million thoughts flashed through Sherman's mind before he made up his mind. Mr. Heath, my family values the weight of a promise very much. Even though the marriage was called off, I shall bring her home to look after her. Watchful eyes alternated between the two families. The guests knew that something was going on without their knowledge. The glints in their eyes betrayed curiosity. There was no way Mason would expose Krystal's true colors in front of everyone. To the rest, Krystal was stripped of her title as Miss Heath out of will. Furthermore, she was a pregnant lady. If word got out of here, people might accuse the Heaths of mistreating a pregnant lady as they didn't know what she had actually done. Since you've given the word, I have no opinion. Besides, she's no longer one of us. This is none of our business, he declared in a gentle tone. He publicly announced that the Heath family would cut ties with Krystal. She no longer had anything to do with the Heaths. Forget about the family bond that they once had. No one would take pity on her for old time's sake. It pained Krystal so much to hear that. Deep down in her, there was actually a faint hope for Mason to at least show mercy due to the years they had spent together. Everyone heard him loud and clear. It seemed like things were bad between the family and Krystal. Otherwise, Mason wouldn't have said such words in front of all of them. Sherman discerned the warning in that announcement. Even if he took Krystal under his wing, the Heaths wouldn't acknowledge the baby in her belly. In other words, the baby had nothing to do with the Heaths. That's for sure, responded Sherman solemnly. Follow me back to the Kingstons' residence later. We'll make sure to treat you right. Krystal's eyes lit up. She won the gamble. At least, she managed to stay with the Kingstons. How ironic. In the past, the Kingston family was the one currying favor with her. Now, their roles had switched. Yale, who was standing among the crowd, stared at Krystal wordlessly. His gaze alone was enough to tell everything. He resented Krystal to the bones. He thought, you've dug your own grave, Krystal. Do you think running to the Kingston family will help? He had tried to hunt her down for the longest time but to no avail, yet she walked into the lion's den herself. What awaited Krystal wasn't heaven but hell. An indifferent Olivia thought, Krystal, oh, Krystal. You're on your own now. Chapter 1463. There was no free lunch in this world. Krystal thought that the Kingstons would take care of both her and the baby, but it seemed like they would only take in the baby and drive her away. Yale simply hoped for Krystal and the baby to vanish in thin air. Krystal had already found a way out. Olivia thought it was much better for her to give birth in the mountains than live in a lion's den. Although Olivia was also the precious daughter Jeff adored, she had it rough when they were broke. Unlike Krystal, Olivia could adapt to it. Krystal was bound to meet her demise due to her greed. That was why she was never as smart as Lisa. Still, Lisa had a taste of karma when Krystal stabbed her without hesitation even though she had paved a bright future for Krystal. Olivia swirled her wine glass, her eyes void of emotions. Long time no see, Olivia. I'm glad to see you today. Calvin and Callista came up to her. Callista bit her lip in guilt when she met Olivia's eyes. She stuttered, Olivia, I'm sorry about what happened that year. I didn't expect Uncle Jeff to show up at that moment. If I had known, I wouldn't have. I know, Callista simply didn't like Olivia back then. Callista didn't bear any ill will to the extent of killing someone. Besides, even if not for Callista, Jeff would have found out the truth sooner or later. It's all in the past. I know you've received your punishment as well. Callista didn't dare to look at Ethan. Even though she was alive, her family had fallen. Hanging her head low, she said in a low voice, I deserved it. I've always wanted to apologize to you in person, and I finally did it tonight. Not wanting to bring up such a saddening story, Olivia offered a smile. Enough now. I heard you've gotten married to Calvin. Congratulations. Since you're back, we can hang out someday. Calvin was being gentle as always as though they were still in their college days. At least that was how it felt to Olivia. It's been a while since we heard of Everly. How is she? Olivia remembered the time she met Everly a year ago. Good. She has the money and time. She's living her dream life. She had a kid too. We miss her. It's been a long time since we last met her. About her rumors, some of our former classmates. As you said, they're rumors. She's doing well. Olivia smiled. I'll be hosting a gathering soon, but I don't have her contact number. Could you inform her about it? I don't think so. I haven't met her for a long time, Olivia put it implicitly. After all, the Cinder family was different from the Miller family. The Cinders would never allow Everly to be one of them. Once her kid was discovered, it would put her in danger. Olivia didn't want to reveal Everly's whereabouts either. The three separated ways after sharing a few words. The people who had once dragged Olivia down now came up to her to curry favor with her. That was a 180 change in their attitudes compared to the past. Miss Fordham, I mean Miss Heath, I'm sorry about what happened that year. I hope you won't take it to heart. I wanted to help, but you know how it was back then. My son was too full of himself. Please don't bear him ill will, Miss Heath. There were all kinds of ways to sugarcoat their past deeds. Now, no one would mistreat Olivia, who had become Miss Heath. Chapter 1464. Olivia didn't want to hear a single word of their flattery, and impatience was evident on her face. Noticing her mood, Ethan sat next to her to shield her from the unnecessary conversation. That was how humans worked. When one rose high, people would flock around one. When one became bankrupt, one would lose the friends one thought were close. Olivia thought that there was no need to form unnecessary relationships. True power came from within oneself. She watched Krystal, who was just nearby. She was eating, all puffed up just like how she was in the past. Olivia smiled faintly. You know, being shameless isn't a bad thing sometimes. What matters is that you achieve your goals. In comparison, Molly behaved timidly due to the environment she grew up in. She suffered a lot with the Kingston family. Ethan took a slice of cake for Olivia. The Kingston family isn't all rainbows and unicorns as Krystal is imagining it to be. It's a lion's den. She'll spend her days crying soon. After noticing Olivia's gaze, Krystal had the nerve to come up to her. Feeling proud of herself, Krystal smiled triumphantly. Look, I'm back because of the baby in my belly. What can you do to me? Yale is powerful, but is he as powerful as his grandfather? I'm born to be a princess. She then cast a glance at Molly. I'm not like that bitch. She doesn't look like a princess even if she dresses like one. Molly was prettier, but she was more of the girl next door type. Not even the expensive gown on her could mask her nervousness. Olivia was different. Jeff raised her to have the image of a rich lady. This was a high-end party, yet she was here with peace of mind. She took a sip of milk and a bite of cake, the sweetness hitting the roof of her mouth. A smile adorned Olivia's lips. One's image has something to do with the environment they grow up in. Changes can be made through practice. But when it comes to looks, family background, and potential, they're all set in stone. It's useless no matter how much you dislike it. If I were you, I would have found a good place to stay until I went into labor instead of wandering around with my baby as my defense. That was an implicit way of calling Krystal ugly. Olivia had the looks to do so. Forget about Krystal, even celebrities paled in comparison to Olivia. Krystal glared at her. People live to survive. Even if I'm incompetent, I should pave a route for my child. Don't get ahead of yourself too soon, Olivia. Am I? Olivia tilted her head at Ethan. I was stating the facts, though, wasn't I? The way she tilted her head was adorable to him, so he caressed her head. Reality is something hard to accept, so people tend to get angry. Olivia chuckled. Right, the lady who was supposed to be a princess turned out to be a maid's daughter. She was born ordinary. Now that the packaging is gone, how could she stomach it? If I were her, I would have found a place to hide myself, not embarrass myself in public. The couple didn't say much, but it hurt Krystal all the same. Fury had Krystal's features contorted. Olivia continued, anger is bad for your health. Don't let it take a toll on your baby. This is your only bargaining chip. If you lose the baby, what are you supposed to do? Will the Kingston family send you to prison? Chapter 1465. Olivia wasn't the type to kick someone when they were down, but Krystal was practically asking for it. In the end, Krystal left with her tail between her legs. Molly still had an inherent fear of Krystal when she saw her. Other than that, she also felt strong hatred. Krystal had caused her to lose her baby, the baby that she had never stopped dreaming about. Tatiana patted her hand. Don't be afraid, Molly. You're the heiress of the Heath family now. She can never hurt you again. Molly said softly, Mom, Krystal did so many bad things. Is there no way to punish her? This matter concerns the Kingston family. We can't do anything too blatantly. But, a hint of cruelty flashed in Tatiana's eyes. Since she has shown herself, she won't be able to escape. The banquet ended, and Yale was called over to the car. Sherman held his walking stick with both his hands. The atmosphere in the car was extremely intense. What are your thoughts on Krystal? Yale replied without hesitation, I want her dead. I don't mind, but the time isn't right yet. I want her to give birth to the Kingston baby she's bearing. Then, I'll hand her over to the Heaths. I don't care what they do to her, but in these few months. I won't accept that. She killed Molly's baby. I won't allow her baby to live either. Sherman gave Yale a resounding slap. I think you've really been charmed by that witch. I have no comments about Krystal, but that baby in her womb is yours too. You know your brother is impotent, and we don't have a lot of children in our family. I need this baby to live. I'll talk to Mr. Heath about it. Yale took the slap without flinching. He still had a determined look in his eyes. Grandpa, I wouldn't have approached Krystal at all if you hadn't threatened me with Molly's life. I feel disgusted knowing that the baby in her is also mine. Rather than having the baby suffer a painful life, it'd be better to let it pass on before it's born. It wasn't that Yale was a cold-blooded man. He just knew that he wouldn't have any love for the baby. Krystal's demise was set in stone. He would rather not have the baby rather than allow it to suffer for the rest of its life after it was born. Yale was an illegitimate child. He lived in the slums with his mother when he was young. She was a bar girl then. He had always been shunned and never got to experience love from his parents. Then, he was taken from his mother by the Kingston family. His stepmother claimed that she would take good care of him, but she actually tormented him in secret. He was just a tool for the Kingston family, a stepping stone for his younger brother. His likes and interests didn't matter. His father and grandfather didn't care about anything he did. Then, he met Molly. She was the first person who cared about him. She made him feel human again. She was the light that gave him a reason to live. In the past few years, Molly's life was rough, but so was Yale's. She was no longer a weakness of his, so he wouldn't be pushed around by the Kingston family anymore. He didn't want another baby to be born into a tragic life. If there wasn't any love, the baby shouldn't be born. I don't even want to talk about all the things you've done in the past. I'll tell you this much. I want this baby to be born no matter what. Don't even try anything, or else, don't blame me for being heartless when you don't get a dime of the inheritance after I'm gone. Yale thought it was laughable. He had known about the Kingstons, planned for quite some time. Gordon had always seen him as the offspring of a bar girl and was ashamed of his existence. Gordon had already talked things through with Adalia. They planned to leave all their inheritance to Dale. I don't need you to tell me that. I've never even dreamed of taking anything from the Kingston family. Grandpa, I don't really want to be enemies with the Kingston family. But, I'm no longer part of the family from today onward. I've already repaid my debt to the family for raising me. Yale got out of the car and walked away after he said that as Sherman cursed at him from behind. Chapter 1466. You're an ingrate. You're just like that cold-blooded mother of yours. We should have gotten rid of you. Do you think the Heath family would accept you, Yale? Dream on. You're nothing without the Kingston family. You've grown naive after spending so much time near that woman. People will only care about their personal interests. What value can you provide to the Heaths? The swirling snow clouded Yale's eyes. He was only wearing a shirt on him, and the weather was very cold. The snow kept falling heavily. There was a woman in a fur coat standing a small distance away from him. She was looking at him worriedly. Yale, Molly started to run toward him. Yale was worried that she might fall, so he quickened his steps and dashed forward to hug her. They shared a warm hug in the snow. Yale, I'm sorry. Molly, I've never been so happy before. I'm finally free from the Kingston family's control. From now on, I want to live for myself. Yale, you still have me. Yeah. Olivia and Ethan looked at them from a distance. Ethan said, let's head back. She'll be fine since Yale's with her. Ethan saw Olivia's eyes glisten under the street lamp. True love is always wonderful. Their love is so perfect that it makes me want to protect it. I'm just relieved that I stopped Molly at the hospital. Olivia thought about her horrible experiences. For Molly, at least she always had Yale's unwavering love. That was very good. Ethan came from a better family and was more capable than Yale. But in terms of love, Yale was the winner. Let's go. Olivia withdrew her gaze. Krystal had sealed her own fate. Everyone had choices in life. But once the decision was made, there were no do-overs. After going through so much, Olivia cherished the life she had even more. She thought the person who wanted her dead would make a move that night. But maybe it was because the security was too tight, so nothing happened at the banquet. Unexpected guests showed up at the Heath residence. Tyrell's family of 3 arrived but didn't even manage to get into the door. Mason wasn't the kind of person who would be rude to guests. But the Heaths were protective of their own. Alfred stood at the door with a gloomy expression. He said, I'm sorry. Mr. and Mrs. Heath went to sleep as soon as they got back. It's late now, not a good time to visit. You should go home. Come back another time if you have business with Mr. Heath. I really have some important things I need to speak to Miss Fordham about. Please let us in. Miss Fordham is asleep as well. It's not a good time. After he said that, Alfred left them at the door. He didn't show Tyrell any respect at all. It was the same scenario Olivia experienced back when she visited Tyrell. The door closed before the 3 of them. Neil said annoyedly, Dad, let's go home. Mr. Heath's intentionally refusing to see us. Go home. You're an idiot. Tyrell had already retired. He had everything he wanted. The reason he was visiting was to build some connections for Neil. But from the looks of it, that wasn't going to happen. Honey, what else can we do? What can we do? We have to do what Olivia did back then. If we can't appease their anger, not getting a promotion is the least of our problems. Our family might be done for. What? You want me to get on my knees? Tyrell got on his knees without another word. Stop yapping and do it. They were under surveillance. Mason could see and hear them. The 3 of them kneeled at the entrance of the Heath residence, just like what Olivia did back then. The only difference was the weather. Olivia kneeled in the rain while the Monroes kneeled in the snow. Chapter 1467. Meanwhile, Olivia was performing acupuncture on Mason. He didn't even open his eyes when he heard Alfred's report. Just leave them be. Alfred looked at the weather. It's below freezing temperature tonight. If they stay out there for too long, I don't care even if they die outside. Mason opened his eyes abruptly. He was furious when he thought about how Olivia had kneeled outside the Monroe residence the entire night before. Olivia was naive. She had thought she would be able to change Tyrell's mind and have him help Jeff for old time's sake. Saying that he didn't dare to cross the Miller family was just an excuse. He just couldn't be bothered to help. He had just been promoted and felt good about himself. He felt like there was no more benefit in him helping the Fordham family out. When his butler told him about Olivia, he had been sipping on some tea. He said casually, let her kneel all she wants. She's still too naive. She'll probably back off when she realizes her efforts are for naught. His indifference was a massive blow to Olivia, who became even more helpless. Mason, who was in a position of power, understood what went through Tyrell's mind back then. He didn't have to do anything but let them kneel at the door. No one would dare talk about it even if the Monroes died at the entrance of the Heath residence. Olivia finished the acupuncture session. Mason held her hand. Olivia, you had a hard time before this. If only I had found you sooner, then you wouldn't have gone through so many hardships. It's okay, Grandpa, it's all in the past now. Jeff was actually very good to me. I had a good life up until the Fordham family went bankrupt. Aunt Molly is the one who had it worse. You're stronger than she is. Olivia was lively and dignified, while Molly was a little too timid. Aunt Molly is suffering mentally and physically. She needs some time to heal. You can't rush it. Olivia, I am so lucky to have a granddaughter like you. Mason looked at her smile and was reminded of Natalie in her youth. He wondered if he would ever get to meet her again. Olivia's acupuncture treatment lasted for an hour. It was getting late, so she headed back to her room. Alfred stopped her. Miss Olivia, Tyrell requested a meeting with you. She thought about how she was in the rain for a whole night that time and had gotten very sick because of it. She had even waited at his office, wanting to see him. His secretary had told her, Miss Fordham, Mr. Monroe says he doesn't know you that well. At this moment, Olivia shook her head. Just tell him that I don't know him that well. Then, she walked away without saying another word. The Monroes weren't the only people in the world who needed help. Tyrell was only able to gain a foothold in the city with Jeff's help. But he refused to help out when Jeff needed him the most. It was time for him to pay for what he did. The atmosphere in her room was very lively. The children were having a pillow fight. There were some white feathers on Ethan's head. He was wearing a cashmere turtleneck and slacks. His attire, paired with the feathers, made him look very gentle. Zach was hanging on his arm like a monkey while Alicia was trying to climb on his back. The twins were very mischievous. Willow had a bright smile on her face as she sat by the side. She was silently expressing her joy. Even Connor had dropped his usually dignified mannerisms. This was the first time Olivia had seen him acting his age in a long time. The sight of her kids brought tears to her eyes. Her dream had become a reality. She felt very happy inside. Chapter 1468. The snow didn't seem like it was going to let up anytime soon. It even started snowing heavier at midnight. The temperature quickly started dropping. Millie's mink coat was already covered in snowflakes. It had never crossed her mind that one day, she would be kneeling at a place like this because of Tyrell. They kneeled for around 2 hours before she fainted. A guard came over and helped her into the car. Alfred also told them that everyone in the house was asleep and he wouldn't be letting them in. Tyrell could only bring his wife and son back home with a heavy heart. Mason's silence made it clear that there was no room for negotiations. Ethan looked on coldly as Tyrell got into his car. He said, Brent, the glory days of the Monroe family are over. Go dig up some dirt on them. Yes, Mr. Miller. Just because Tyrell was a retired government official didn't mean he didn't have any skeletons in his closet. He was just lucky that he didn't experience too many setbacks in his career. Tyrell is a cunning one. You should look into Neil. Understood. Neil had a dad who was in a position of power. Surely, he had done a lot of questionable things. The next morning, Ethan and Mason both received a classified document. The contents of the document were very shocking. Mason became visibly upset when he read it. The Monroes were extremely vile. Tyrell's crimes were mainly focused on accepting and giving bribes. Neil was worse. He had ties to the underworld, participated in illegal gambling, and had a very colorful personal life. He was horrible to his wife, Stacy Burns. She was one of the prettiest women in her university, and he had tried to get with her for several years. Stacy was already engaged at that point in time, but Neil forced himself on her the night before her wedding day. Her fiancé, Felix Marshall, wanted to file a lawsuit against him. However, Neil crippled Felix and forced Stacy to marry him. Then, he got tired of her after 6 months and started to find mistresses. He gambled away the money he received as bribes and even physically abused Stacy. Once, he beat her up so badly that she had a miscarriage. Mason threw the document down angrily. He looks so dignified, but he's such a piece of shit. Olivia brought some snacks for him and saw him throwing a fit. Grandpa, calm down. She picked up the document and glanced at it. Her face quickly flushed in anger. This man is an absolute scum. Ethan patted her on the back. Don't worry, Liv. Neil is done for. Neil had a bright future ahead of him when he had a father who had his back. At the moment, however, the evidence against Neil was bulletproof. Mason didn't even need to deal with him personally. The police soon received an anonymous report, which turned out to be from Felix. In the past, he had tried to lodge reports in the neighboring city multiple times but to no avail. This time, a squad from the police headquarters went to investigate the matter. Even the Department of Justice got involved and started looking into Tyrell's and Neil's questionable behaviors. Tyrell and his family had planned to sneak out of the country but were stopped at the harbor. They were arrested on the spot. Millie knew that they weren't going to get out of this situation scot-free. They were doomed. Olivia didn't think she would be able to visit the Monroe residence again. Tyrell never dared to live too luxuriously. So, he lived here with his family despite having a lot of other properties. The gate of the villa was rusty. She had knelt down at this very same spot back then. The door of the house was opened, and the maids were terrified. Felix, who was in a wheelchair, followed behind Olivia. Miss Fordham, Stacy's parents haven't seen her in 6 months. The last time they saw her was at the hospital when she had the miscarriage. Is she already? Don't say that. We'll know when we go inside. A maid led them to the hidden basement. They opened the door, and a stench came out of the room. Chapter 1469. Luckily, it wasn't the stench of a rotting corpse. It was just the smell of stale, humid air and rotten food. A woman who was extremely frail and unnaturally pale was locked down here with all 4 of her limbs chained. She sat on the bed, hugging her knees with a blank expression. Stacy. Felix quickly wheeled himself next to the bed. Even Olivia, who was a seasoned veteran, felt emotional when she saw the state Stacy was in. Neil was such a bastard. He ripped a couple apart, didn't cherish the woman he snatched away, and even abused her so much. It was clear that Stacy had been imprisoned in the basement for quite some time. She was also in shock. She looked at the people who had just entered the room blankly without any reactions. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes. She asked someone to get a towel to cover up Stacy's nearly naked body. Felix felt terrible. He didn't shy away from her. Instead, he hugged her tightly and comforted her repeatedly. Don't worry, Stacy, I'm here now. Olivia sent the 2 of them to the hospital. She sighed deeply as she exited the hospital. She used to feel bad for herself. But she understood that she wasn't the only one who had a hard life. Ethan tried to calm her nerves. Don't worry, I won't let the Monroes off the hook. If Dad knew the Monroe family who he helped out ended up hurting so many people, he would be so sad. Liv, you need to know that the Monroes won't be the only shady people in the world. There will always be people lurking in the darkness. Everyone has their own paths to walk. That's true. Let's go home. Olivia cherished her current life even more after she witnessed what had happened to Stacy. Her special phone rang in the afternoon. She had already notified the organization that she wouldn't be accepting any more missions for some time after the failure of the last mission. So, she was quite surprised when the phone rang. Even so, she still picked up. Hello, Septem. I knew you were alive. Olivia had some people look into Undecim after the incident. He did a very good job of hiding. There were no traces of him to be found. I was just lucky. If my gut hadn't told me to throw away the ring, I would have been blown to pieces. Undecim's voice was still as nonchalant as before. Olivia replied calmly, why the call? She didn't think they were on good enough terms that he would call her just to tell her he was safe. We might have failed the mission, but we're still the top ranked in the organization. The boss has invited some of the S-ranked and A-ranked members to a gathering. Will the boss be present? Why are you so anxious? Are you plotting against the boss? I told you, I'm just curious. Olivia joined the Black Ravens to uncover the truth of what happened. The boss had to know something. The only problem was that the boss of the Black Ravens was too elusive. It had been 2 years since Olivia joined the organization, but she didn't manage to get any leads on the boss. Where is it going to be? And for how long? The boss's private island. 3 days. They're calling it a gathering, but I heard some news that the boss might have a huge operation planned. That's why he's gathering us for a meeting. I'm not interested, Olivia turned him down resolutely. Why? Haven't you always claimed to be on the side of justice? Have you lost interest in protecting the world? It seems like the target of the operation is someone very important. Who is it? How would I know? I'm not the boss. Get there before 4 p.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. You'll be able to meet your hero soon. Undecim hung up. It was almost New Year's. Honestly, Olivia didn't want to leave her family at that moment. It was the first New Year's with her entire family present, but she couldn't help but think about Undecim's words. An important person. She thought about the multiple attempts on Mason's life. Would this operation be related to him? Chapter 1470. Olivia spaced out as she sat in the corridor. Why did this gathering have to happen at this very point in time? The ringing of bells sounded next to her. Willow had come to check on her. The child noticed that Olivia had a heavy expression on her face, so she rubbed her face against Olivia's hands. Willow lived in the village for a long time, and she was very close with all sorts of animals. She would sometimes act like one. Olivia ruffled her hair with a tender expression. Why aren't you playing with your brothers and sister? Willow shook her head and made a hand sign. She was worried about Olivia. It was probably because she had heard a little of what the adults were talking about and thought Olivia was feeling sad for someone else. Willow was a very considerate child. She might not be able to speak, but she had a big heart. Olivia lifted her into her arms. I'm fine. It's just that the fates of others are already determined. I can't save everyone, so, I'm trying my best to protect the people around me. Then, she changed the subject. She said hesitantly, I might have to go somewhere for a few days. Is it okay if Dad takes care of you? I'll be back very soon. Honestly, Willow didn't want Olivia to leave. But she understood that Olivia had things she had to do. She made another series of hand signs, indicating that she would support Olivia no matter what. Olivia kissed her on the cheek. Good girl. Willow was a child she went through a lot to give birth to, and the child was growing up well. Olivia smiled faintly. That night, Olivia told the 3 younger kids bedtime stories and lulled them to sleep. Then, she went to Connor's room. He was reading. Olivia talked to him for some time and told him about her upcoming trip. Connor promised to take care of his siblings while she was away. Finally, she went back to her room. Ethan had been waiting for her for some time. He wore a white bathrobe and was talking on his phone by the window. He hung up after some time. Olivia hugged him from behind. Tyrell will probably receive a 15-year sentence for his crimes. The best case scenario is he'll be almost 80 years old when he gets released. As for Neil, he'll definitely be spending his life in prison. I'll have some people take real good care of him in prison. Liv, I'm sorry for what I did back then. He had already apologized so many times, but he didn't know what else he could say. It's all in the past now. Ethan, I'll be leaving for a few days. Where are you going? Olivia told him about the Black Ravens gathering. Although they weren't married, they were still partners. She wanted to inform him so that he wouldn't worry. Ethan frowned slightly when he heard that. Liv, I don't think it's the best time for you to leave. I joined the Black Ravens to uncover the truth. Also, a big move by them will still shake the world no matter who their target is. If I can find out more about the mission in advance, we'll be able to make preparations. Besides, it's only 3 days. I'll still make it back in time for New Year's. There's still 2 weeks left. Ethan sighed. I can't really say anything else since you've already made up your mind. But you have to keep communications open so that I can rescue you at the first sign of danger. Okay. Olivia didn't turn him down. It was better for her to err on the side of caution. Since she was going to leave the next morning, Ethan did it with her until very late at night. He left his mark on every inch of her body. Olivia woke up at the break of dawn. She noticed a necklace around her neck. Ethan looked at her. Even if you're unwilling to accept a ring, a necklace should be fine, right?